Hi, this is Merrisa with another INC4 update from Ottawa, Canada. So we are now on day 5 of the INC4 negotiations, and I just want to take us back a little bit as well to yesterday. Yesterday we were able to actually gather in a plenary session after at least 2 days of negotiations within contact groups. So basically what had happened is we spent the first half of the day within our contact groups, and these contact groups were subdivided into subgroups to facilitate more smaller, much more rich discussions. And once we were able to move out of our contact groups, we then both contact groups actually came together to provide report backs during the plenary session, which was yesterday afternoon. So in the plenary session, we heard from the co-facilitators of both contact groups, that is Contact Group 1 and Contact Group 2. With Contact Group 1, the co-facilitators have noted that there has been successful progress of being able to streamline the revised zero draft text, but also being able to find areas where member states are converging on so that we are now able to move forward with actual textual revisions at some point. Within Contact Group 1, yesterday we spent most of the time really engaging around provisions for fishing gear, engaging around provisions on emissions and waste management. And I'd just like to highlight one of the points that was raised on waste management during the plenary session by Contact Group 1 co-facilitator, which is that many countries were alluding to the fact that the Basel Convention already covers much of the waste management aspects of the of plastic pollution, and perhaps we should try and avoid duplication within the plastics treaty around this. However, there were a few countries that have actually gone into the Basel Convention and state that there are definitely gaps within the Basel Convention around plastics. Within GAIA, we've been able to actually look at the Basel Convention comparatively with what the treaty could now cover. And this includes that the Basel Convention doesn't actually pay attention or struggles and continues to struggle to pay attention to chemicals and polymers that are contained within plastics. It also, the other gap to highlight is that it doesn't cover all plastics, right? There are some gaps within the types of plastics it covers. It doesn't cover plastics that is mixed waste that still passes our borders unchecked, resulting in waste colonialism in Africa, for that matter, or in Latin America. So that was one of the key things that we really need to note, is that whilst we want to be able to align this treaty with other multilateral environmental agreements, we need to be conscious of the gaps that are present within those agreements. On that note, I will just like to go very briefly into a few of the other provisions that was also covered under Contact Group 1, which included more discussions around the scope of the treaty, principles and definitions. With scope, we received the report back from the co-facilitator during the plenary session that the scope has now been reduced from 16 options to 4 options, really highlighting the progress and the purpose that member states have come into these negotiations with to really advance the work of the treaty. So I will leave Contact Group 1 on that note, but let's maybe go into a little bit of what was reported back on Contact Group 2. So in Contact Group 2, we heard a lot of, the convergent points was around the financial mechanism. However, whether that financial mechanism to implement the treaty will actually be a dedicated multilateral fund, whether it will be a hybrid financing, or whether it will be, drawing from existing sources such as GEF funding, is yet to be determined. But one thing that we can rest assured is that in order to address plastic pollution, we really need to have a dedicated multilateral fund. because, thus far, any existing funding hasn't been able to address the magnitude of the plastics crisis. So we really have to pay attention to that. On the other note, during the plenary session, we also heard both co-facilitators of the contact groups suggesting to us that there has been many conference room papers released by a few groupings of countries. For example, we have a conference room paper by Rwanda and Peru around primary plastic polymer reduction. And these conference room papers will actually feed into some of the things that we can negotiate on and inform the positions of member states much more greatly, because these papers are obviously backed with science and backed with research. And then I want to also touch on a little bit of conflict that arose during the plenary. We did have a point in time during plenary where our developing nations were calling for us to not go late into the night in negotiations, but also to not go in three parallel subgroups. The negotiations now, we have about 2 days or so left, and some member states are calling that we speed up things and we get into three parallel subgroups, and this will simply not work for smaller delegations like the African group, like your PCIDs, and especially countries that have brought only like 2 people. It will be very difficult for them to split themselves out into 3 different subgroups, but also try and cover the content through the night. Very eloquently, we had Brazil, China, and even the African group saying that we cannot jeopardize the ambition of the treaty with an ambitious timeline, and we have to really be mindful of that as much as we want to have a treaty by the end of 2024, we have to be able to negotiate on substance and be able to capture the views of all countries, so that we carry everyone along. And this was very much emphasized by the African group of negotiators, that we should not be going alone, but we should be going together and going far and making progress together, united on this treaty. So I guess I could leave it on that note, but I will also just quickly touch on that the floodgates for observers had also opened during plenary last night, and it was really encouraging to see observers making their statements. So we had observer statements from GAIA, who really emphasized that we currently have the numbers on primary plastic polymer reduction. We currently have the political will around the world and in the room, because throughout the INCs, we've counted at least 144 countries, making their submissions on tabling primary plastic polymer reduction. So we were glad to hear that coming through from GAIA. We were also glad to hear interventions being made by the International Alliance of Waste Pickers, really calling for the just transition provision within the revised zero draft as it stands really needs to include and respect the rights of waste pickers, because at the end of the day, waste pickers comprise over 20 million people around the world, and if we cannot recognize the value that they bring to our waste management systems, then we will not have a strong and successful treaty. I would just like to maybe lastly end off by reiterating some of the sentiments that came out of the plenary yesterday, which is that we currently have only 9 days to negotiate the treaty until basically this is the 2 days we have left here, as well as the 7 days that we will have in South Korea for the INC5. But keeping in mind that haste does not equivalent or does not equate to success, and that we need to make progress on substance, and that substance needs to be an ambitious treaty that will really deliver strong measures to end plastic pollution. For more updates, you can be sure to have a look at all of our social media pages.